early in the book, you sort of say that you were you were chosen essentially, or you were sort of identified to go and work as an economic hitman for some of the character traits you had, or flaws. Not that I think you're a particularly flawed person, but that they were looking for certain characteristics basically within in your personality, and I was curious what you thought this like what were the specific things that they saw in you that they felt that they could use, like what made you an ideal candidate for them back in the day.
Well, I am a very flawed person, incidentally. And um, to begin with, let's start. I first was recruited by the National Security Agency, and they put me through several days of very grueling tests, including a lot of them under a lie detector. And I figured I totally failed because one of the reasons I was interested in joining the NSA and later the Peace Corps was because I wanted to avoid the draft. I did not believe in the war in Vietnam. And so under the lie detector, I had to say that. And I figured, well, the NSA is not going to like that. They want something loyal, and I consider myself to be very loyal. We shouldn't be in Vietnam. But anyway, and so, and the other thing was they asked me if I'd ever lied to the police, if I'd ever been interviewed by police, if I'd ever been under interrogation, and how had I reacted. And I told them, yeah, I'd lied to the police. And the story behind it was I had quit Middlebury College in my sophomore year. I ended up going back to school, but the day I quit, that night, a friend of mine who was Iranian, his name was Fahad, took me out to this bar, this local discotheque, and there was a lot of live music. And, at one point, make a long story short, a big old farmer sucker punched me. And Fahad stepped in and he pulled out a little knife that he carried, a very small knife, and he cut the guy across the face. It wasn't deep, but he had a technique for doing this where he put his thumb on the blade. So just a little bit of the blade, it would scare a person. I mean, I'm not advocating it, but it wasn't, when you say he cut the guy's face, it wasn't as bad as it sounds. It was more like a cat scratch, which can bleed a lot. And then he pushed me into the men's room, and out the window we jumped down into the Otter Creek and little river, and made our way back. And the next morning, the police came and grabbed me and took me to the police station and started questioning me. And I lied through my teeth. I said, "Oh, I didn't see any knife. No, I don't remember any fight. No, there was not. Oh, there was a little. The guy hit me, and there was for hard, pushed me away or something. I don't remember exactly what I said, but I lied through my teeth, and I had to tell the NSA interrogators, well, they weren't interrogators. I had to tell the lie detector that this, and so there were some other things too, but I figured that. I just wouldn't qualify. And as it turned out, they liked all those things. The fact that I didn't want to go to war in Vietnam, they thought was kind of smart because at that time they were pretty sure we'd lost the war in Vietnam anyway. And why would anybody want to go and get killed or kill other people at the last, throes of the war? So that was fine. And they loved the fact that I lied to the police. It showed them that I had the guts to do this. And also, Fahad's father was a general in the Shah's army and very close to the Shah, and also worked closely with the CIA and the NSA. So this was a real plus for me, that I was friends with this guy whose family was extremely well connected. And so anyway, so that was part of it. And then the other thing was that they came up, they discovered that I had these three characteristics, which probably are not uncommon of young men my age, but perhaps were more severe with me because I'd grown up in a boys' private school where my dad taught, a boarding school in New Hampshire. And I spent all through high school surrounded by young, wealthy men. And yet I was not wealthy by any means. My dad was a teacher. We lived in housing that was provided by the school. I ate in the dining room with these guys every day from the time I was 4. Surrounded by these wealthy guys, and I grew up with this kind of inferiority complex and a fear of women. I was very shy of women, but I was extremely attracted to them, you know? And so, you know, the final characteristics were, you know, I had a desire for money, power, and sex. And they, yeah, like I said, what young man doesn't? But I
Yes.
think mine was perhaps more, you know, more significant than many because of that particular background that I had. And incidentally, I'd gone to the first 8 years of school in the public schools in this very, very poor New Hampshire town where the mills had all vacated the town. And so I had grown up with really poor kids, but at the same time living on this campus with very wealthy kids. So anyway, I was an ideal candidate.
Yeah.
So they offered me a job.
Oh, well, I mean, yeah. When you're that age and you're seeking those things, and someone says, "Hey, we think you'd be great for this thing." I mean, I'm sure it'd be very difficult to say no to that.
Well, I said yes, but then I don't know. Some days later, I was walking down the corridor of Boston University. I was going to the Boston University Business School at the time, and there was a Peace Corps recruiter inside giving a talk, and I went in out of curiosity and listened. And at the end, I had always wanted to go to the Amazon and live there because I grew up with this incredible fascination with Indians. Like I said, I grew up in a rural part of New Hampshire where there was a lot of stories about the Indian raids during the American Revolution and the French and Indian War. And my grandmother, my great something grandmother, had been captured by the Algonquin-speaking Indians and taken to Canada. And there's a long story. So I had a fascination with that kind of life, and I knew the only place in the world where the people still lived like that was the Amazon, or one of the few places in the world. So after this guy's talk, I went up and spoke to him. And I said, "Hey, if I asked for the Amazon, do you think I'd get it?" He looked at me like, "Are you crazy?" But he said, "Yeah, we need people in the Amazon. No one asks for it." So I went back and I called the guy at the National Security Agency who had been my primary promoter and happened to be a good friend of my wife's. I was married at the time. My wife's husband, my wife's father, and my wife's father was very high up in the U.S. Department of the Navy. They were in Washington, D.C., and a very good friend of his was high up in the National Security Agency, and he was the one that had arranged all this. So I called him up and I explained to him this, and I said, I'm really kind of torn here. And he said, "Oh, go to the Peace Corps." He said, "I'll even help you get in and make sure you get to the Amazon, because while you're there, you'll learn survival techniques, and you'll learn about relating to another culture, and you'll learn another language, and you'll be more valuable to us in the National Security Agency after that experience than if you didn't do it." And he said, with that kind of a background, you may very end up working for a private corporation that has close affiliations with the National Security Agency, because at that time you'll be well suited for that. So I encourage you to go ahead and join the Peace Corps. So I did, and spent the next 3 years in the country of Ecuador in South America, most of that time in the Amazon.
Good news, everyone. My book about GameStop, the craziest story ever told, is now finished. Well, almost. Still waiting for the final draft. So, in the meantime, I think you should look at pre-ordering it or any one of the multiple fantastic, beautiful t-shirts that I have designed in order to sell with the book. Thank you, everyone, for your patience over the last few years while I have been finishing it very slowly. And I am really, really excited for people to read it. Link is in the description below. Enjoy the podcast.